Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Bahamaland. Welcome back to another edition of this show by Fayne Thompson. We'll be focusing today on some things which we feel are important to you. But first, let me say, we want to thank the producer for the last show we did. We want to thank you for your responses. We thought they were very helpful, very informative as regards the kind of show you want. So we're going to be trying to get you more of those type shows. We had a great turnout in terms of people who watched and enjoyed the show, those who viewed it, and those who sat and who watched it. So we want to ask you guys to continue watching this slot. Next week we'll be starting at exactly 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock, and we'll go for an hour each day, 45 minutes to an hour, and we want you to join in. Now the important thing about the show is, again, your support. We want you to share when you see the show. Share to your friends. Let them know about the time slots. We will be on hopefully for 3 days out of the week, until such time as you decide, the watching public decides, that you want to see more of Fayne Thompson and more of the kind of shows that we're going to put on. We also want you to give us some ideas, some suggestions as to a name for this kind of show. First and foremost, we are going to be outside of the mainstream. We're not constrained or handcuffed by the corporate media. We're not constrained or handcuffed by working for the government. We're not constrained or handcuffed by the shareholders of the major news medium. I think you guys understand exactly what I mean. We are an independent show. This is independent programming, and we want you to enjoy this. I'm going to call this show right now The Vlog. It's a voice online, the vlog, or the whatever you want to call it, the pictorial vlog, where your views and my views hopefully will share a common appreciation. About 20 minutes into the show or thereabouts, we're going to take a quick break. We're looking forward to your sponsorship of this show in strategic locations so that we could bring this information to you, so you could enjoy it more, so you can see where we're coming from, etc., etc., etc. Now, in the past, I've done many shows. Over the years, I've done many shows. I took a break because I felt it was becoming too personal. The conversation in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas about radio talk and TV talk. I've done television and radio. That is to say, I've interviewed multiple people on TV and radio, but I felt it was just a bit too much. The personalizing of the conversation and so forth, so it was necessary for perhaps just to stand back, just to sit back, to see the kind of program that I want to be part of. I understand the agenda, but if I have been called back to the mainstream, when I say the mainstream, if I have been called back to this particular chair in which I sit, it's because there's some things which are weighing on my mind, and I want to share them with you, and I want to develop a body of opinion in this country which is unlike the bodies of opinion that you've seen and heard so far. I will tell you that over the many years on Facebook, I have seen the increase in terms of understanding of the great issues which impact our country by Bahamians I have never met. I'm not going to call the name of one young man, Stephen, except I'll say his name is Delavo. Everybody knows Professor Gilbert Morris. I don't have permission to call the names of a lot of people, so I'll just leave it there. But a lot of people that I've met, it has shown me that this country is moving in terms of the understanding that we have about what's important to our country. And people are maturing in their views. 20 years ago, most people did not know what an economy was. 20 years ago, people did not understand WTO. 20 years ago, people did not know what it meant, privatization. Things have happened to us in this country, to Bahamians in this country, and we did not know what these things were about because we were too, it's just someone reading something, I'm not interested, etc., 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 and they just went on their way. This programming hopefully is going to focus on things which will continue that development of Bahamians from knowing nothing to being experts. I can truly say that there are many, many people with whom I share commentary on Facebook who impress me in terms of the maturity that I've seen in them simply by blogging, simply by vlogging, whatever you want to call it, Facebooking. Let's call it Facebooking. And today we're going to focus a bit on that as my lineage to come back to this particular place, to this chair. And one of the reasons that I felt I had to come back was because there's a part of the conversation which concerns me. There's a part of the conversation which concerns me. A lot of times, things are not explained to Bahamians. You will see these big statements in the newspaper about the economy needs this. You will see this big statement in the newspaper about the economy is going in the wrong direction or going in the right direction. Or, for example, a certain amount is going to be invested in schools, a certain amount is going to be invested in that. Or that this company or that company is privatizing. We know about the story of Oban. If I were on air at the time of the Oban story, I don't think I would have been able to contain myself. We know about the story of Oban and how that undeveloped. We know about all the many things that people have been trying to push down our throats, and we have accepted them unquestioningly. But no more, no more. That's the purpose of this show, is to give you a point of view which allows you to go out there and make the case for a different way of looking at things. Now, on Wednesday, I started essentially by dealing with the whole drama, you might as well call it a drama, surrounding BPL. And I don't want to dwell too much on that, but there's a part of that show I'm going to go back to today for about 15 minutes, and in the second half we can invite a friend of mine in, and hopefully we're going to be able to widen the scope of the conversation, because I want to talk with Graham Weatherford not just about alternative energy. I want to talk to him about this announcement recently by BPC, Bahamas Petroleum Company Limited. They so fast, they say that they're going ahead with their exploration even though they don't have a strategic partner. So what does that tell you? And whether or not we really want to bother or fool around with fossil fuel and fossil fuel energy, fossil fuel-based energy. Because again, successive governments have pushed us in the direction of fossil fuel energy. Some people say because of the middlemen who control the oil industry in the country, men and women in one particular company, everybody knows the name of that company, who supposedly are the middlemen between the purchase and sale of oil which comes into the country. We know that the fossil fuel industry is dying. We know that the fossil fuel industry is threatening our planet. So that's what I want to talk about today with Graham, and I want him to give us his take on basically. Today, privatization. What does that mean? Now, please do not tell me, like I said on Wednesday, you don't understand it. Please Google it. Privatization. Let me tell you why it's so important for you guys and you women out there to understand what it means. Because every decision that has been made by successive governments, essentially since the middle to late 20th century, has been made on the basis that the default position for developing and running the Bahamas is that we privatize everything. We privatize everything. Now that's not good. That's not good. There is a place, of course, in our society for the market. All of us are basically entrepreneurs. We want to be able to go out into the market if we can and make a couple of dollars and take care of our families. That is true. And at the level of the private sector, that is an energy, that is a motivation which people must understand at its very basic level. That is understandable. That is something we must be able to embrace and to understand and to internalize in the private sector. Now, the whole motivation in the private sector is profit, making a dollar, etc., etc., etc. Now, somewhere along the way, and that motivation to make a dollar is a good one. But then there's some qualifications for how and when that is to be done. So this conversation about privatization is important. And I want those of you who are following me today to go on Facebook and look for an article by Mr. Leon Williams. He wrote an article in response to something which I had posted. An excellent article. It was informative. And that article, to some extent, once we begin the conversation, and we invite your questions. We invite your commentary, good and bad. And that article that he wrote says a lot about where we are as a nation. Now, you notice now, I began by distinguishing between privatization in the private sector and its impact on the public sector. For example, there are certain industries which we may feel, or we come to the conclusion, are better dealt with in the private sector. Maybe the provision of services to do with garbage collection. The provision of services to do with some contract, for example, that BTC, when it was a public corporation, would have needed to be done. The provision of, let's say, cleaning services at the hospital, etc., etc., etc. The provision of certain road works from the Ministry of Public Works, etc., etc., etc. Now, in those circumstances, and ladies and gentlemen, this is not just a show, but this is a teaching session. Because I've had to be taught. I've had to go and self-teach myself about these things. And I've observed, you see, I'm not only a lawyer and a barrister and a political economist, but I'm a nationalist. One who's concerned to see what is going on in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and to understand it in its proper context. So what do we have? When we talk about privatization, we have to be careful what we talk about. Because on two levels, on one level, it's a good word. On another level, in my humble opinion, it is a bad word. And it is a bad word because the effects of it could necessarily not be good. Now, how should privatization operate? What is privatization? Let's begin with the basic stuff. Privatization is seen as the process of transferring public assets or public industry from the public sector to the private sector. It's very important that you understand that, because Mr. Leon Williams' article is going to be very important when you get to that point, for you to understand how we have been hoodwinked. Howard Johnson said it. Bamboozled, run amok, led astray over the many years by the spokesmen who've come forward to tell the story that privatization is this manna from on high, which will rescue all of us, all of we, from our poverty. Big lie. Now, it's important first that I give the definition, then we go back to why I distinguish between what the private sector can do and what the public sector must do to ensure that goods and services guaranteed for the people of the Bahamas are provided without interference and without the profit motive interfering. That's important. That's important. What is privatization? Privatization is the process of transferring public assets to the private sector. The public sector is that part of our economic system that is run by government agencies, the public sector. Privatization involves either the sale of government-held assets or removal of restrictions preventing private individuals from investing in that public sector. Now, privatization is something which is the subject of a great debate. And I'm going to say this to you, that as of the mid-1980s, and I said this to some extent on Wednesday, I'm giving you an historical overview. As a result of the mid-1980s or thereabout, the private sector became almost the sole focus of government policy in terms of driving the Bahamian economy to a particular place. Government decide, hands off. Everything must be given to the private sector to be done because we cannot do it. Government actually got to the point of saying, it ain't us no more. We cannot do it. We are incompetent. We are incapable. You heard Peter Turnquist in the House of Assembly before he became Minister of Finance that all or most of these public corporations should be privatized. He said that. Now everybody, he was unchallenged. And for many years, this mantra, this new thinking, which started really in the late 1980s, 1990s, popularized by Margaret Thatcher and embraced by us to some extent, especially with their privatization of their cable and wireless industry. This became the mantra of the Bahamian government. Now, you would think that the Progressive Liberal Party, a party of the people, would have worked hard to resist the temptation of joining in this so-called fraud, which says that everything that is to be provided for the Bahamian people can be provided simply by the private sector. That was not true. That was clearly not true. But the PLP embraced that. And to whether they like it or not, and I'm not going to be the type who sits here and runs an F&M line or a PLP line or a DNA line, but the truth and the fact of the matter is, that is the mantra that they pushed. That somehow every service that ought to be provided in this country should be provided by the private sector, where the profit motive is the dominant motive for things to be done. And that's important. That's very, very important. That's very, very important. It's important for you to understand why that is said and why that is done. So we know that privatization defined is the transfer from the public sector to the private sector of provisions of goods and services. Now notice now, what is the role of government? Is the role of government what Article 52 of the Constitution says that it is? What does Article 52 say? That the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas is responsible for the provision of peace, order, and good governance. Peace, the maintaining the peace, order, the rule of law, good governance, the provision of services, etc., 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 for the Bahamian people. That is a constitutional obligation which the government of the Bahamas had, one which they cannot renege upon, one which they cannot flout, one which they cannot wink at, and so forth. Now the PLP and the F&M supposedly believe in that no, whether they believe or not, it's not important. They are obliged to honor that mantra. Remember I just mentioned the PLP. But since the late 1980s, and just can't blame Mr. Ingram, even though he was more vicious at it in terms of privatizing this country. The fact of the matter is both the PLP and the F&M embraced the idea that the Bahamian people's interest can be served by the government dropping its influence and investment in the public sector. That is to say, driving development, similar to the way it is done in many European countries, similar to the way in which it is done in Singapore, similar to the way in which it's done in many countries around the world, including the United States and Canada. The Bahamian government bought into that almost to a fault. That is to say that it was the only means by which we could develop the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That was the so-called mantra. Now that's important because if you understand the history, then you understand where we are. And examples of that privatization or move to privatize everything was the repeal of the Immovable Properties Act. What was the Immovable Properties Act? It was about protecting the sale of Bahamian real estate and prioritizing the interests of Bahamians. It was about selling state assets because essentially to help in offsetting the cost of our national debt. The argument by some is, and some was, that certain corporations were inefficient. That is to say, they were not making money. And because they were not making money, we could not continue to maintain them on the public purse. Classic examples, BTC. We know about the disaster of BTC. Another example, now we keep hearing Mr. Turnquist talk about others he's spoken about, which is which was this BTC. Yes, and of course water and sewage. We keep hearing people now talk about privatizing that. And certain people, notice where the conversation is coming from. And there's no difference in this regard between the political parties. They all seem to have addressed the mantra that the public sector is not to be invested in by initiatives launched by the government to bring new opportunities to the Bahamas. So, for example, something as simple as the oil industry is now being talked about as being led by BPC, Bahamas Petroleum Company. They're even using our name to try to fool us that somehow it's the relationship that we have with them is the good one. So there we have again decided to privatize even an investment in the oil industry, which most say in the country is a guaranteed multi-billion barrel industry. Potentially, that's the word. So that is a classic example, an historical overview as to the impact that this privatization has had on our nation. It has had the effect of really an unsettling effect of prioritizing the private sector, foreign direct investment as the engine of our growth. Now, the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, is that from really the mid-1980s, 1990s to now, there has been no real appreciable new investment, new revenue stream in the Bahamas of any substantial degree, other than since 1992, everybody knows that this is a fact, other than Atlantis and Bahama. That's a fact. That's a fact. And the question is that the kind of way we want to continue to invest in the people of the Bahamas? To the extent that the government's role in the economy has grown, in fact, it is just the opposite. Government's role in the economy has shrunken. It has gotten smaller. These are some of the things that we have to concern ourselves with when we talk about privatization and whether or not in the circumstances it makes sense to go in that direction of greater and more privatization. So the importance of it is that it's seen as an engine of growth. The impact of it is that it has failed to bring new, real investment in the Bahamas to widen the scope of revenue, widen the revenue streams to make it possible for more and more Bahamians to become entrepreneurs, etc., etc., etc. It has failed. This experimentation for the last 20 to 30 years has failed, save and except the smaller community of people who are rich in the country gotten richer, but the overwhelming majority of Bahamians have not really seen any appreciable increase in their net worth other than their jobs, and perhaps, when I say their jobs, some advantage or two. But Bahamians are now left the so-called scraps from the public sector by the Ministry of Public Works to hope and pray they can get one or two contracts here and there, to line up in front of the Department of Environmental Services, the Ministry of Education, contracts for the cleaning and building and maintaining of schools. This is what Bahamians have now been left to do, to compete in a sector which is contracting because, of course, of the challenges of so-called globalization. And another thing, before I go on to deal with privatization, another thing which has happened is that we have this newest development that we are now being told by Javago Line, by Ray Winder, and other persons like that that there's no longer any protection in the country for Bahamians. We've been told that. We're being told that openly now by politicians. Mr. Darren Pitstock said yesterday or a couple of days ago in the newspaper that we need not worry about the WTO. The conversation has been paused. Well, it ain't coming back. Because if it comes back, I think any government that wants to push that must be out of their minds. But that's what they're suggesting. So there's still this desire to push the Bahamas to a place where government plays no role, no productive role, no wealth-creating new role in the country, save and except to be the facilitator of foreign direct investors and one or two local billionaires, and that's the Bahamian experience. What then? What must we do? Privatization is basically what this conversation is all about. And I hope that I've been able to lay the historical background to show you how it has not really answered the claim that it benefits our country. That's the important thing about it. It has not answered the charge that it may not have benefited our country. What then is privatization? What then is the prospect for privatization? Before I do that, I'm going to turn now to the article by Leon Williams. Leon Williams on Facebook just a few days ago, in fact, I'll turn to it so you guys could go through it with me, shared with us his take on the privatization of BTC. Because you see, when I had this nirvana, I should say, this thought about what was going on with BTC, what was going on essentially with BPC, with what am I saying now? There's so many, the many corporations, Bahamas Power and Light. It reminded me of some of the difficulties that we had with BTC. BTC has gone from one of the most successful telecommunications company in the Caribbean to number 9, Mr. Leon Williams says, to number 9. He wrote an article, and I recommend that many of you, if you get the chance to see it, please look for it. It's a very good article. It talks about some of the difficulties that BTC has had. Let me just go to the very top of the article. You may be able to see it behind me. It's actually yes, Brother Leon Williams speaks. I'm going to read this, and hopefully to the parts of it which are not relevant, I'll just simply quickly go over. But I had to post this particular article because I felt that his contribution to this conversation needed no more from me. Because at the end of this conversation, I want you guys to get an historical overview as to what happened to BTC. BTC was taken from us on the basis of a fraud. Efficiency, we needed to privatize. To protect jobs, we needed to privatize. To enhance services, we needed to privatize, etc., etc. To maintain our posture in terms of national security, we needed to privatize. All of those stories were told to us, and they were all lies, justifying the privatization of the most cherry-picked company in the Caribbean in terms of telecommunications, BTC. What did Leon Williams say? I'm gonna just read it. Most pundits he began on BTC have never read a BTC annual report, pre or post privatization, or did a side-by-side comparison. They have not read the shareholders' agreement. They just regurgitate their baseless and factless feelings that have no foundation in reality and have been enabled through ignorance. Most pundits hop on the old, tired, worn-out phrase, BTC is no longer a monopoly, while working for water and sewage. BEC, Freeport Power, Grand Bahama, Water, Cable Bahamas, the government of the Bahamas, GBPA, that were all monopolies. I think the point which is being made there in that particular paragraph, let me just pause, Mr. Producer, is that the argument that BTC needed to be addressed, the concerns about BTC had to be addressed, the argument was that it was a monopoly and we needed to break up the monopoly because the monopoly itself was anti-democratic. The monopoly encouraged high prices. The monopoly, blah, 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 blah. These were the lies which were told to us before BTC was privatized. You see, one of the reasons why this particular show is so important is because it's a recap, really. It's almost like a bird's eye view into what they're planning to do right now with Bahamas Power and Light, stroke BEC. First, they have to damage it, they have to demonize it, and then they're going to gut it by a few small number of Bahamians or foreigners who are going to come in and swoop in and have their way with it. Let me continue reading. The UK government nationalized their cable and wireless in 1947 and made it a monopoly throughout the British Empire. It took that profits that were made on the back of the inhabitants in the colonies and gave them to the United Kingdom government. Now that's important because basically what he is saying there was that, let me continue. He speaks for himself. We were complicit because we said nothing. Margaret Thatcher privatized cable and wireless, in 1979, but kept the golden share, and we said nothing. Most don't even know what the golden share is, not just that, but when they did liberalize, they created a subsidiary of cable and wireless to compete. But colonies can't imitate the kingdom because we are still slaves on the plantation. And although 1838, 1967, and 1973 came and gone, our minds are still shackled. Well, we know what all those words are all about. Those dates deal with important times in the terms of the freedom of black people around the world. We mimicked Margaret Thatcher to the letter, not applying any context, saying that governments cannot run state-owned enterprises, so we must privatize. I want to repeat that. We mimicked Margaret Thatcher to the letter, not applying any context, saying that governments cannot run state-owned enterprises, so we must privatize. Let me pause there. Interestingly about that particular conversation is this. No telecommunications company in the Caribbean was more efficient, effective than BTC at the time of its sale, a state-owned enterprise in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The biggest lie that was told to us by every politician in power at that time was that we needed to get rid of BTC because it was a monopoly or it was inefficient, etc., etc., etc. All right? We sell a cash cow that we own because the prices were too high. That was some of the things that we were told. When BTC tried to lower the cellular rates, BTC was told no, because to lower the rates before privatization would make it difficult for the new strategic partner to make an ROI investment. That's what that means. The government of the Bahamas, GOTB, owned BTC 100%. A simple memo to BTC could effect a rate reduction. That never happened. That's what Mr. Williams is saying. Do you need a strategic partner to lower the rates? These are some of the questions which were raised by by people in the corporation. BTC was allowed to increase its landline rates before privatization. You know why? Because the government of the Bahamas could not find a strategic partner who would buy BTC with a flat rate of $10.70 per month rental. Every other Caribbean country metered local costs. And he's given some context. He's given some background as to the state of BTC at the time of its so-called privatization. This is important, ladies and gentlemen, that you understand what privatization means. It is not manna from on high. In fact, it is the alternative, the exact opposite, if not properly executed. It's counterintuitive to think that way. But let's walk on. Let's move on. The government of the Bahamas, GOTB, that's what Mr. Williams means. The government of the Bahamas, that's why they own, yes. The same government took $80 million from the accounts of BTC in 2010, 6 months before it was privatized, and still left $59 million of taxpayers' money in BTC accounts, even though the agreement that was only for $50 million would be left as working capital. To our insult to injury, you complain of BTC's monopoly, but you privatize and left the monopoly in place. This, again, is Leon Williams explaining what happened. They privatized, but they left monopoly in place. Because much later on, we know that a life has come around. And to this day, to some extent, BTC still has a monopoly on wide parts of the so-called telecommunications industry in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, even though Mr. Sinclair talks about a reduction in his returns over the last fiscal year of $100 million. To add insult to injury, you complain of BTC's monopoly. This, I'm continuing. But you privatize and left the monopoly in place. More than stupid, this is Leon Williams. You boxed yourself in by agreeing to pay $100 million if you liberalize the first year, $80 million cash if you liberalize in the second year, and $40 million if you liberalize in the third year. You provided exit clauses for the other shareholders, but none for yourself. Remember now that this BTC arrangement is such that half of the company is owned by Cable and Wireless, the new owners, well, former owners, now. And the Bahamas had 49%. And remember the confusion then by one minister. He as far as he was concerned, 49% and 50% was the same thing. You forced BTC to pay all the privatization costs, which exceeded more than $50 million. You, the government of the Bahamas, agreed to pay the BTC pension deficit. At the date of privatization, April 2011, the BTC pension was plus $6 million. Let's scroll up a bit for me now, Mr. Producer. $6 million. In 8 years of privatization, Cable and Wireless have dismissed over 800 employees as a result. 800 employees as a result. Yes. Let me just find my way again. 800 employees. As a result, the pension deficit as of March 2015 was minus $98 million. Do the math. The government of the Bahamas sold BTC for 51%. For $210 million plus a $7 million tax. Cable and Wireless, in its 2012 annual report, page 106, final paragraph, stated that a cash consideration of $204 million, not $210, paid a net cash outflow of $148 million. He's giving you the details of this corrupt deal, which was visited upon us under the guise of privatization. To further compound this bad deal, the strategic partner gets 2% of gross revenue as a management contract plus dividends, which essentially secures the so-called managerial control of the company by this foreign entity. At the time of the sale, the compensation for 16 Bahamian executives was $2 million. Let's scroll down a bit more. It was $2 million. A year after, Let's go down. Let me just properly. You want me to do it for a year after? Oops, yeah. A year after. Sorry, at the time of the sale, the compensation for 16 Bahamian execs was $2 million. A year after privatization, the executive compensation had ballooned to $7 million. Many Bahamian executives were sent home, and not a single one got an increase in salary. It is from this backdrop of increased executive compensation, a management fee, 800 plus Bahamians losing their jobs, engagement of a so-called global leader, I asked, what did the Bahamian people get that BTC could not do? Privatization does not of itself reduce rates. Liberalization properly regulated does. What did we expect? Cable and wireless to reduce rates? They have an obligation to their shareholders to provide a return on their investment. Let me tell you what we got. And this is the important part, and then we can leave off. 1. 24 months after privatization, a catastrophic failure of the national networks for more than 8 hours. 2. Over 800 Bahamians lost their jobs. 3. 36 months afterwards, 70,000 dropped calls per day. 4. Little capital investments. Do you think that they would have invested in fiber optics cables, ubiquitous GSM and DSL, in the Family Islands? And they haven't done that, ladies and gentlemen. That's the point that Mr. Williams is making there. Rather than BTC putting money into the consolidated fund, the GOTB, government of the Bahamas House, to pay out BTC $150 million. That does not include the increase from the 100 employees that will be let go next month. The outsourcing of Bahamian jobs in the call center, engineering, IT, finance, human resources, and so forth. Bahamians who built and maintained this ready-made company now are no longer qualified to answer 1916-914 or manage BTC. 51 years after, so other folks nullified the management contract of Page Communications and appointed the first all-Bahamian executive team of the company in 1968. What we got is a company making an average of $75 million a year in profits that they met in place, and the pundit said was legacy and obsolete. What we got under the so-called global leadership staff morale at an all-time low, in the toilet, integration, fatigue, productivity down. BTC, that was number 1 in the Caribbean, is now number 19. I'm sorry, I said number 9, number 19. What we got is a company that was sold to Cable and Wireless in 2011, merged with Flow in 2015, sold to Liberty Global in 2016, and spun off to LILAC in 2017. Now he apologizes just a bit down for his verbosity. But what Leon Williams did as an analyst, a political economist he does not know that he is, he gave us the nuts and bolts of the failure of the manifest corruption which went on in making the decision, first, to privatize. Secondly, in the execution of this privatization. And 3, he foretells. It is a foreboding picture as to what is to come with this privatization model. I finished with that. Because I've explained, I think, why we have to be so careful when we hear people talk about things like privatization, as if somehow it is the manna from on high. It is not. And the young Bahamians who are listening to me, please read, Bahamas, read. Teach yourselves about the important things that I know you are capable of understanding. Do not rely on just the Fayne Thompsons of this world, the Gilbert Morrises of this world, the Paul Morses of this world, the Mike Larrys of this world, the the Wayne Johnsons of this world, just to teach you and so forth on Facebook. Learn, teach yourself so that you can understand what is going on. Now let me say today, I want to say good day to our viewers. You have been viewing it essentially in a show which I had intended to take a break on, but I think we're going a full hour. How old are you, Mr. Producer? Okay. I have gone a bit longer in terms of taking a break, but I think that you've gotten the point. I want to say thank you for tuning in. I want to tell you thank you for allowing us to come and share with you, to teach. And if there are any questions or concerns, please feel free. Feel free for putting a question in. Later on, they can actually be later on we can actually perhaps respond to you. Looking at some of the comments, looking at some of the comments, and we've had one or two comments. Some people said good day. It's good to see you too, my good sister and my good friend, of course, Ms. McIntosh. Good, wonderful to have had you. Thank you very much. And for those of you, Sam Major, good day to you too. Debbie Edgecombe, good day to you too. We appreciate you tuning in. Isn't that? My family, good to see you too. Kenson Knowles, what is this KGIB? Well, cancel, give me a call afterwards. We can actually speak offline. But really, this is an important show. And if you guys want to get a copy of the show, it's going to be rebooting in a couple of minutes. Please look at it. Please look at it. And please begin to understand. Explain to your friends and your kids that this is no big issue for you to pain your minds about. It shouldn't just be the Gowan Bowes or the Peter Turnquist of this world, or the Ray Winders of this world, or the Zhivago Lines of this world, or the Fayne Thompsons of this world, to explain to you what our economy is all about, what privatization is all about. You have to learn. Let me tell you why you have to learn. If you don't learn, it'll be too late, because they would have given away our country. They would have given away our country. You can watch this and share this particular show at any time beyond this point. You can actually take an interest in it to the extent that you want to send it to others. And that's what I want you to do. Because the whole purpose of the shows which I'm going to be part of is to tell you things and to share with you things that you will not hear anywhere else. I am telling you that the status quo of foreign direct investment and this incestuous relationship between politicians and oligarchs in this country is destroying the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And we've seen it. We've seen it in multiple attempts to prostitute this country for zero, nulch, nada, and for only a small group of people to benefit from the wealth of this country. That is what you must concern yourself with. And you must learn how it works. You must be smart to pick up when it is actually happening. And it's happening now to BEC. We must embrace BEC if we're going to keep it. And if not, we have choices. But do not let that choice be taken away from you in the form of, again, we must continue with more dependence on the fossil fuel industry. BPC, in this very fast way, is talking about proceeding with drilling without a so-called strategic partner. The government has not decided to invest in this industry, not even the irregulated industry, when these are options that we have, very easily obtained and very easily achieved. So I'm saying to you today, the conversation goes on. La lutte continue. That's the French for the struggle continues. You have to continue to be vigilant. Pay attention to those who know. Don't just rely on the so-called mainstream media, because their instructions are clear. Justify continued dependence on fossil fuel. Say nothing about people who are corrupting this country. A classic example is that Oban deal. This is the kind of thing that we are now being asked to come to terms with and to find normal. Leon Williams is now come forward and actually said a whole number of incredible things about the cable, about the BTC deal. And he should know, because he was the CEO. He had an intimate understanding of it when they came knocking on this door and they said, Leon, we don't need you no more. But now we don't need you no more. We can take it from here. These are some of the things. And when people like that speak, you must learn. They've played a role in our lives and they have the information. We must listen and we must learn. So to all of you who've watched, to all of you who've joined in, I thank you very much. We'll be back on Monday at 1. We're going to have about an hour again, another session. Hopefully we'll have one of the leaders of one of the political organizations. We're going to be taking him to task on what his organization is all about. We want to understand why we should look at his political organization. Because clearly the question with the PLP and the FM is this: are they serious? Are they serious? Are they serious? They want us to vote for them. Are they serious? You know, the unfortunate thing is that in this country, politicians and parties run default positions. When the government becomes unpopular, the opposition sits back because they know that the Bahamian people have established a pattern of voting against the government with whom they have difficulties. The question is, can this pattern be broken? Can Bahamians become more in terms of demanding accountability? The trade union movement is in uproar. Someone who took part in those marches yesterday is going to have to be joining us on Monday. The trade union movement is up in uproar. The working Bahamian is not happy. Doctors are striking. They're still on strike as of today and at this particular moment. The Bahamas Public Service Union is saying that their industrial agreement has not been honored. Multiple issues. Multiple issues are facing our country. On Monday, join me again at 1, and we can continue. Fayne Thompson. We can look at the issues that impact you. God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. How long was that?